is there something where young people, not only are you nurturing talent, you're providing that belonging, but you're providing access to an environment where they can do things, where they can be creative and they can build things that make them feel good?
Yes.
And do you observe that quite often there may be young people that aren't afforded those opportunities elsewhere?
Yeah. I mean, like, the fact that we are completely free, open access, anyone can come along. And we were working with, we opened a hub up in Worthing, right on the high street. Really tricky place to do things, but that's what we like doing. And honestly, like in the 2.5 years we've been open, very rare do we get an incident. Very rare do we ever have a problem we can't solve with like restorative processes and understandings and discussions and working with police colleagues, working with local authority, whoever it is. And always kind of going, other people aren't allowing this young person in, we're going to, and they're all right, they're fine, because we're giving them a bit of respect. There has been a few occasions where we haven't been able to do that, but the majority we can, and we always work our way back as well. So it's always open, So, yeah.
If you were a social worker or a police officer or a teacher listening to this and shining the light on what Audio Active or an agency like yourselves could do, what information do they need to provide to you that would be most helpful for you to engage with a young person who would benefit from your service?
That's quite a varied question there.
Well, I asked that question because sometimes I'm going to say, well, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure you've had referrals that say, we just want you to build a relationship with this child.
Yes.
And one of my friends, John, credit him, will say, that's great. A relationship to do what? What's the purpose of it? And what you're describing and articulating is the purpose of the relationship is to create some alternative belonging, to create the skill sets, to create an alternative to potentially some of the more harmful aspects of life that young people may be drawn in, to draw on that more painful or harmful ways of having that need met. So what would you advocate that social worker or that teacher or that police officer or other professional think about when they're considering an agency like yours?
I would say the most important thing is that they've asked the young person, because without their agency in it, there's no point in even trying. Fortunately, we do have that. It's very rare that we have a referral where they don't know they're coming through to us, or they don't really understand why they're there, or that kind of thing. And I also think that police and schools and social services and hospital and everyone, it's a tough time at the moment. And I think that there might be a little bit more knowledge about what's on offer for the third sector and that grassroots kind of organisations. That could probably be a little bit more helpful for them as well. And we could probably do a little bit more kind of getting to know them a bit more, even though we do, and just trying to develop those relationships. I think it's a two-way street. And I think that we all need to kind of refresh ourselves once a year, because things change and people move on and people move teams and all those kind of things, and just keeping the young person's voice at the centre of everything we do to the best of our ability as a multi-agency group, and not just as Audio Active.
I love that. And I think part of the discussions that we've had and part of the purpose of this podcast is that the focus on the voice of the child, and then drawing in the other voices that ultimately will be influenced by one another, that ultimately will determine some of the trajectory or the direction of travel, in that you've received information, I may have received information, another agency has, the family have, and between us we'll have our own narrative, our own understanding of what that means, that will then mean whether or not a child reaches a particular threshold or whether a child receives a particular service. So it makes me think around how we work to hear, connect and reflect on all of those voices in order to then think how we move. The reason I say that is several years ago we saw some young people that were in similar situations, and one group of professionals had made the decision that they were going in this direction, And yet, in very other similar circumstances, the other group of professionals had made the decision that they were going in this direction. And I found that fascinating and thought, well, how do we have those conversations and connect people in order to understand that and think about the different things that will influence the direction that young people's lives can sometimes be pushed down. And you're making me think around the creativity and the voice that's offered here, and how do you ensure that that's harnessed, captured, and placed into the environment where the decision is made?
Yeah, well, that's a good question again. I think, you know, sometimes we'll be asked to go to strategy meetings or give feedback on a young person or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I often hear some of my colleagues, managers saying, oh, you know, I'm the one in the room who's giving all the positive kind of feedback and, you know, really kind of going to bat for this young person. And that usually comes because the child is comfortable within our kind of service or within our kind of walls, so to speak, and they're not as comfortable in a school or somewhere else. But then you'll find out that actually schools where they feel safest, so that's where they act out the most. You know, those types of things happen. And I think it comes down to mainly just thinking to yourselves, you know, this might be someone's behaviour today. This might be their experience today or for this 6 months or year. But actually how we influence them in this to think about their decision making can really impact the rest of their life. And that's a really big thing to hold, isn't it, for a young person's life? Because, you know, if they're being arrested and they've got, you know, different substances on them or a weapon on them or whatever, what we then need to do is make sure we don't criminalise young people, but we also need to make sure we safeguard them. And we spoke about this a little bit before. Where is that line? How do you make sure that happens? And what's the impact on the rest of the young people around them and communities and everything else? But I think it goes back to understanding that children and young people don't make those decisions without some type of issue going on for them in their past well before that came in. And it's about kind of how do we address that as a community? How do we support people to feel like they can, you know, be nurtured and belong? What is it that's led that kind of outcome to happen to that young person or to that community? So it kind of, I don't know if that answers the question, but it kind of like brings so many different things that we have to constantly think about every day. And I think we do it on autopilot, actually. A lot of the time we don't think about it until it becomes like there as a massive issue. And what I've seen Audio Active kind of deliver, and young people, we were working with, we have worked with multiple young people, and they've kind of been involved with stuff, and then they've gone and got a job, or they've, you know, or they come and work with us sometimes because we've got a young music leader kind of sessions where young people can be with us up to a certain point, and they get into their own artistry, and then they want to actually do what we do for a living. So, I mean, to be able to offer that is beautiful. And then they get all those skills and they can go and work anywhere and, you know, teach music for a living. But also teaching someone how to make a beat or mix a tune or whatever it is, you're basically teaching them how to make money.
The way you speak reminds me it's so inspiring because it makes me want to go back into practice. I think when I think back around the opportunity, what a privilege to be in a position where you can work with young people and you can... Sometimes they don't even see their talents, you know, thinking about, you know, their ability to draw. Like there are some young people that I've worked with and that they're such good artists and they're so talented, but they might not fit in the school classroom. And you said two really, really important things, I think, which was the first thing, and we're quite rustic here, so I like to make notes as we go through. I don't mind. Thinking the first bit was that somebody's behaviour may appear on the surface that they don't like something. For example, if someone's kicking off at school or things are difficult, that it might appear that that's a negative place for them. But actually that might be somewhere that is really important and positive. And the fact that they're there, they may have that's their way of being able to draw people in. It may be their way of managing. There might be multiple reasons. What you're describing is looking beyond that behaviour to better understand it before decisions are taken, which I think is what you're bringing to the table when you're working with other partners. And the other bit that you mentioned was around the real challenge of when we talk about safeguarding, what that actually means. So we say that we don't want to criminalise young people, and what we should be doing is working towards safeguarding. And inevitably that means that we're holding an element of that young person continuing to experience harm while you're working towards the ultimate goal, which is more about increasing safety as opposed to removing risk. What you're describing is how you keep alive the risk, but that young people can take risks in a context that's safer.
Yes.
Which is exactly what you've been describing. And so if I was listening to this conversation and I was working with young people, I'd be thinking, that's what I want to be referring or having the conversation with you about. Have I really understood what sits behind the presentation, what sits behind why we're worried about the risk or the vulnerability? Have I really understood those needs? Can I have a conversation with you or another agency and that young person to think about how potentially those needs could be met in a way that's safer, that reduces the possibility or likelihood of someone being scooped up and those needs being exploited? Because that's the challenge, I feel, that for a young person who may be being exploited, quite often what they're receiving is very real.
Yeah.
You know, they are receiving a sense, I say a sense, they are receiving belonging, they are receiving positive things. Now, I'm not saying that they're not also experiencing horrific abuse, but it's very difficult when you have a young person in a situation where what they're experiencing is positive, but in our assessment it's also harmful. And so there isn't a simple way for us to say, okay, well, we'll just refer them to Audio Active, or we'll just refer them to somewhere else and they can fix that, or they can resolve that. There's going to be something over time that is where we're working to influence, I feel. Would you say that's
I
fair?
think you're absolutely right. And I think, you know, it goes across the board up and down the country at the moment with what's going on with county lines and youth violence. And, you know, the other thing that plays a huge part in this is money. You know, and that's the one thing we can't give them is to say money, and neither should we, because that money's not real. But we do pay them to perform. So, you know, you still kind of like their artistry is powerful and is worth buying for the masses, you know, for them to buy into them. So you give them another kind of thought pattern on how they can make money. And a lot of the time when they get involved in different things and stuff, it is around belonging, but it's also around money, and there is a need. So, you know, it opens up to lots of different questions with how we as a country do this and how we do that, and actually what we see as our real issues and problems in our country at the moment, or different areas, than kind of, you know, papering over it and saying, oh, this doesn't exist here, because people don't want to admit that children are dying at the hands of one another, or are causing each other so much harm, or are exploiting each other, or, you know, all the different things that we know goes on. And it's scary. At the same time, what we know in life is things change and things move, and individuals change and move, and young people do come out of that. Some don't. Some do end up going to prison and, you know, having a really difficult and challenging life, or however it goes for them. But actually, the percentage can be higher for change, and I think we need to remember that, and we do need to think about how we harness that and what works. And I'm not saying Audio Active is the answer to that at all, because we're not. We're part of that change, and I think everyone needs to get behind really hearing from young people what they need to be able to have a good future, which is where Youth Voice comes in, and, you know, all that collaborative working, and it not just being one person kind of saying, oh, I know what we're going to do, we're going to do this now, because that doesn't work, and we know that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think that throughout our conversation, and obviously I know you, the one thing that I feel that Audio Active delivers is 100% belief that things can change.
Yes.
100% belief.
Yeah.
And even if you might be disappointed in a behaviour, you're not disappointed in the child or the young person. No. There's that absolute commitment to, we're on this journey, and the only outcome is that it can be better. Yeah.
I mean, there's always a reason why someone's doing something. Always. Whether it's a child, an adult, it doesn't matter. It's always something. Are they tired? Are they hungry? Are they experiencing something that's, you know, not helpful for them? and also when they're in their best self, what's going on for them then. And if you can get that, and you can find the middle ground with them, then that's great.
God, this is something that's often so missing in practice.
Yeah.
We will review when things have gone wrong. And we find often the same things, but what we're not doing is looking in great detail at what's worked. So when that young person had that period of stability where they weren't going missing, where they weren't reporting that they'd suffered harm, what was it that was happening around that person at that time? Yeah. I'd love if we were able to kind of push some of this, I call it creative, some of these ideas around, let's do a critical learning review when something's really turned around.
Yeah.
You know, let's work with the young person, with the family, with the whole network. Let's give that the time and let's give that the resource that we would give when things have gone wrong, so that we can learn what's worked, and maybe we can replicate that and maybe we can then push that forward.
That would be great, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't it?
If we could actually do that. I mean, I think we are quite privileged in the fact that we do get to celebrate things with young people, whether that be we're putting out an album with their music on it, or we're putting on a show and they're performing and their parents have come. And, you know, we did a show up in Crawley a couple of years ago, and a young person's dad came along and he was just crying his eyes out, and he was not the kind of man who would cry. I think men should cry, just to say that, but he was not that kind of man, and he was just like, thank you. And it was just amazing. Like, honestly, like I cried. I was like, oh God, I've got to cry now. But, you know, it's just when you see that coming togetherness, it's beautiful. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And I'm fortunate enough to have been able to see that in statutory settings as well.
Good.
And to be able to have provided the space for workers, social workers, multi-agency teams to be able to do that work. That's then led to a different outcome.
Good.
And I think, and what I'm observing the more that I spend time elsewhere, is that these stories exist everywhere.
Oh God, yeah. Yeah.
I think what I need to do is to identify and highlight this more and more and more, so that we come together more, we learn more, and we think about how does that shape some of our responses. So going to go away with that.
Good. I think though also, you know, we have to look at, I think we do need to have some more positivity around things, because we do always hear about the kind of horror stories and the negative outcomes and impacts and everything else. But there's so many young people that we've all worked with who are doing all right, and we forget that. And then you see them, and in my old job, I see a lot of older young people that I used to work with kind of walking down the road, and I'm like, oh, what are you doing now? And they're like, I've got my own business, I've got a car, I've got a partner, or a missus. That's what they say, I've got a missus now, Mitch. Yeah. And I love it, because I'm like, get in, that's what you needed. You needed someone to be with you, and you've got a home and you're all right. And, you know, there's a young person I worked with years ago now, he's absolutely smashing life. Obviously, I can't say anything about it because that would bring his identity in it, but I'm so proud of him. And if he listens to this, he'll know it's him. So I'm really proud of him. It's really good. You know, when you just watch someone, and there's a fair few of them actually who are just doing brilliantly. And, you know, they were in a hostel when they were 16 years old. So they had everything picked against them, but they done it. There's
something about what you're describing, which when we talk about goals, quite often what's missing is where are we trying to get to?
Yes.
You know, if we're saying, how is this young person going to know when we think they're safe enough? You know, what is it that they need to achieve? And I use that language specifically because that's what they'll say. Yeah. What is it that I need to do in order to come home? What is it that I need to do in order for this to happen? Yeah. And I don't know if we spend enough time doing probably what you're describing, which is, where do we want to get to? What could life look like? What could, let's draw out what potentially.
That's the miracle question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, you know, if you could have your you know, you wake up in the morning and what's your day like for it to be your best day? And, you know, I've worked with young people in previous roles, not in this role at all, where it's like, oh, actually waking up and not having a messy room and it being raining would be a good day. And others being like, you know, I'd have food in my fridge. those kind of things. So then that what's important to that person is that they have food and they have safety and shelter, which is just what we all need anyway. But, and then you kind of build that a little bit more. What else does it look like? What else does it look like? What else does it look like? And, it's kind of like keeping that positive kind of, a little bit of something for them written down to say, this is how I feel good on a day. Whether that's a gratitude list every day, or, sometimes myself, when I get up in the morning and I feel terrible and I don't want to go to work and I don't feel great, I'll say, no, it's going to be all right today. I reassure myself, because you have to have your own self-narrative and talk. And actually supporting people to have that a little bit is really brilliant. But it might be listening to a tune, it could be anything. And it's about finding that bit for people, really.
Wham.
Yeah.
Anyone that's worked in a big organisation will know that for often very valid reasons and important reasons, decisions are made where there's a new process or a new policy.
Yeah.
And I think back to my last one of my last operational roles, where we were really working to think about how we address neglect more effectively. And that's a challenge when you're trying to create tools that can be rolled out, and then you're working with adolescents.
Yep.
And, valid points that social workers would raise, saying, well, some of the questions in this tool are looking at how does this child cross the road with parental supervision?
Yeah.
And they're saying, well, how's that relevant? And me working hard to say, well, actually, think about that more in the context. So what would be a similar scenario? But what you got me thinking about, and this social worker will know who they are if they listen to this. So there was a tool called A Day in the Life. Yeah. So a bit like your question, that sort of miracle question, but it was more so about, have we really understood what a day in the life is like for this child? When they get up, when they do this, when they do this. And one of the key things that I always think about, in particular around when we talk about participation, often that means that we invite children to come to a group, or we invite children to fill in a survey. But actually, how much agency to participate in their own life do they have? Do they get to choose what they eat? Do they get to choose where they live? Do they get to choose what they wear? And so this Day in the Life tool that was designed to really help us understand what is that lived experience. So anyhow, we had an interesting conversation, myself and the social worker, and they agreed that they were going to go off and do this tool. And I went into the office next day and said, I've done your tool. I've done your Day in the Life tool. And actually, it was very interesting. And she taught me through, a lot about what she learned and how that was integrated. She was a fierce advocate for this child, rightly so, because he didn't have a fierce advocate. And she would come to me with these are this boy's talents. This is what he needs. This is what we need to do to support the family. Here's the lived experience. This is the day in the life. This tool, how this connects to this piece of information. And it made me think about really being able to think when we're thinking around assessment, what is it that we need to do practically in order to best understand those days, so we can then help young people work out what it is that they might want to move towards. And that could just be today, could be next week, could be next year. I know that sort of instant gratification, that thinking about next week, thinking about tomorrow actually sometimes maybe too much of a jump. So that's what you're making me think about when you're talking.
I mean, it just, it comes again, kind of what I said before about leaving your ego at the door and being open, and also getting young people's buy-in and agency around those changes. I think it's just so important. And services are doing that more and more now, so that's really positive. Yeah.
So what's next for Audio Active?
Well, so we have just been awarded some funding from the Youth Endowment Fund. I'm hoping you don't put this out until we're allowed to announce.
You've got a couple of months, I think.
We've got a couple of months. And we are going to be working with over 800 young people across Sussex in the schools, delivering one-to-one mentoring work. And it will be part of an RCT, which obviously throws up its own questions and concerns for people around kind of randomised controlled testing. But it kind of, for us, it was about us being able to hang our hat off something and say we really do work, because constantly we're being asked, well, how can you prove that this works? Because, you might have some, feedback from a young person, qualitative and quantitative and all that kind of stuff, but actually it's quite subjective. So how do we know it works? So this really will support other organisations in our kind of field to show that music can work and art can work as a tool, but also for us as well. And we're not saying that we want to go and, take over the whole of the country delivering what we do in school. We just want something to say, actually, this does work. So when we go to local authority or anyone else for money, they've actually got a study to hang it off of. But also, how brilliant is it for schools to be able to have some free sessions with us going in, working with a young person for 18 weeks, 6 months kind of thing, and supporting them to look at their behaviour changes, remain in school, all that kind of beautiful stuff that we do. So we're really excited about that. So that's the first thing. And then the next thing really is we're trying to find some spaces in Crawley because it's very limited there. So we've been doing lots of work with Crawley Pop-Up Culture, Crawley Pop-Up, to kind of show that there is a need for venues to be able to demonstrate the music that we've got and children and young people to be able to go and perform because it's so limited. I mean, we done one in a barber shop as an example. We did a stage a couple of weeks ago, right outside Nando's. Brilliant, sunny day, wicked music. It was great, really, really good. More events, more kind of music, more young people kind of rising through the ranks. Hopefully we're going to be launching a new kind of platform called MXTR where young people can put their music out. We're looking at signing a few artists as well to that. And that's really come about from Adam so that, people aren't exploited in the music industry and they're kind of given a little bit of guidance before they do jump in, if they want to jump in with a major label. And I think some of them will. And then also trying to find a permanent home in Brighton because at the moment we're at Plus X. We love it here, but it's not our permanent home and we want to make loads of noise because that's what we do. We're noisy. Lots of different things really. And I think also, with the Youth Endowment Fund money, we're able to give some of our practitioners full part-time work. And, we haven't been able to do that as PAYE roles and stuff like that. It's all kind of up and down in the air and it all relies on funding. But because we got this bit of funding, can actually give people some security. And for us as an employer, that's really important, is to be able to give people security as well as the young people. So it's there's lots of changes coming about. That's kind of what's next really. Loads of work.
Massive.
Loads of work.
It's amazing.
But I'm really excited to do it all.
So our paths have crossed in my multiple roles.
Yeah.
So there's something else that you've been involved in at a train station with multi-agency teams, where it's been a really interesting development because essentially we had a situation where the police were being called because of what was reportedly antisocial behaviour. And actually what's happened is the police have stepped out of that predominantly, and services like yourself and the local authority have stepped in and worked in the space where the young people are with the young people. Yeah. Could you just tell us a little bit about the success of that?
I mean, from what I can gather from, it's been really successful because we've been offered to go back on a couple of occasions. And we're also kind of doing that across kind of the train lines and stuff. And what it's done is really helped young people and services to have a bit of a kind of a fun time and a shared experience because the young person's performing. So it's almost like they're there on their terms rather than you've got to come to the office and see me and do this and do that. And I think what it's done is it's kind of picked up some soft information and intelligence with each other where they've brought about a different relationship. So I think it's been a relationship building exercise between us, services and young people. And is also, rather than commuters who are great, by the way, kind of going, they're doing this over there. They're seeing them singing and performing and doing nice things and laughing and joking and sharing an experience, still riding around on their bikes, doing exactly what they were doing before. But because there's a few adults there and there's a bit of laughter, that's good. And then also our team have been able to kind of steer away the older community who really shouldn't be there with those young people at that point in time and direct them in different directions, but also bring in people like CGL and people like that who might actually need to be able to support those older community that are kind of there who need the support as well. So again, it just brings that togetherness and bit of community cohesion, and it's not people behind a desk saying this is what we need to do. So I think that's what it's done.
It's a real tangible,
and thank you to the people who supported us to get that in. Actually,
it's
good.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
and
it's really good.
A really tangible way of reducing the criminalisation, not just of children but also of vulnerable adults, by having the services that can best meet their needs in those spaces. We had so one of the managers fed back that someone from CJL said, I've been trying to meet this guy for ages, nothing to do with young people, and he got to speak to him there, and then he started, he engaged, and he started speaking to him. So that was really nice to have that bit of feedback. So we've gone out, worked together, gone out to where we need to be, and just gone from there.
And we continue to do that.
Brilliant.
Constantly. It's good. It's nice.
Michelle, I am excited to see what you and I do next in our creative endeavours.
So am I.
And I'm really grateful for you joining me today.
Thank you. And thank you for having me, and thank you for everything you do. You are amazing, James. You really are. Thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers.